So let's have a bit of a look at the running sheet. So I guess maybe the first thing we'll cover is what this flattened distribution of scores means, potentially what is the source of that, so that we can hopefully understand it better. That will help us make some other decisions, which we'll discuss. Can we change our scores for the purpose of applications? Should we use the old or new scores? Then I guess we'll talk about preferencing, because that's certainly something I've noticed has just been a spike almost immediately of people going on the interview calculator, looking for some clarity around how the scores will play out. Then we can just, I guess, field some Q&A from people out there that have any questions. So yeah, let's rock and roll and get into it.
Fantastic. Awesome. So the first thing is the amazing change in distribution that we've seen, and we've got one of the nicest images out there. When you see this distribution, Scott, what immediately stands out to you?
The gradient.
Yeah.
Yeah, the gradient's it's flatter than what it has been traditionally.
It is. It's yeah, and I guess it is quite flatter, and I guess the median as well has been shifted quite remarkably. As we can see, what was once a 70, and say the top 95, 96 percentile is now hitting the 90th percentile. So it's obviously, in essence, it seems like it's become easier to score higher. What are your takes on those initial sort of initial observations?
Yeah, it seems like there's so there's definitely a few ways that this could be interpreted, and none of these are, I guess, rock solid in the sense that we absolutely know why. But there's a couple of things that went on with this May GAMSAT. One was the option to defer, which some people took. One was the unconscious deferral of people that didn't check their emails, which actually there was quite a lot of people that fell into that category. So they ended up in September anyway. So we potentially had a much smaller pool of students. When you have those smaller pools, you can see wider distribution in the performances and in the curves. So to be in that 90th percentile maybe wasn't as hard in this particular test because of that numerical factor. I don't necessarily think that this was a smarter cohort, but at the same time, if you do have people consciously opting in and opting out that close to when they would have sat the GAMSAT anyway, you would expect that opt-in, opt-out to be largely governed by how you felt at the time. And at the time, a lot of people that were confident would have opted in, and a lot of people that were not confident would have opted out. That's, of course, not factoring in how you felt about doing a test in a digital environment. But there would be, one would expect, a stronger correlation between opting in and doing well. And as a result, that also contributes, I believe, qualitatively to that shift toward the right.
So then I guess that a major implication of what that is sort of saying is that those that, traditionally might have seen their own performance as a little bit weaker weren't actually part of this pool anyway. And so when we're comparing our scores into this distribution, if it's a little bit lower than what we anticipated, it may not necessarily mean we're lower than a representative cohort. And so I guess moving into the application season where we have 3 previous GAMSATs that have more of a traditional distribution, this effect is almost a little bit diluted, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. So the dilution factor will be still predominant, given that there's such a, like, there were less people in this test, and we believe there was less people in this test, and there were more traditional numbers in the more traditional tests. So yeah, this shouldn't be swaying curves or skewing intakes massively. As a result, yeah, I wouldn't be overanalyzing it like that.
Sure. There are, I guess a number of Q&As that have come through, whether it be through emails or through phone calls, two major things sort of stand out. Firstly, the flattened gradient that you brought up before, is this a result of having a smaller number of questions?
Mm. Mm. Without opening Pandora's box, the answer I would say is no. I actually don't think the smaller number of questions in sections 1 and 3 in the digital environment affects this. What we do know is that there was quite varied experiences in the online exam, where some people had very smooth experiences from when they logged in to when they left the exam, and then other people had some pretty horrific stories around being disconnected and moving things around and all that sort of thing. So some people, and it's really hard to know what ACE would have done here, but some people may have only answered 10 questions. That stuff could definitely affect things. Hopefully that's the minority of people, but it's hard to know.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I guess another thing that's popped out is a little bit of I guess anger that's hit the conversations surrounding people that are applying, for next year specifically. And does that mean that if I didn't sit March 2020, am I on average at a disadvantage compared to those that did sit the exam? Considering the median score is so much higher and the curve is a bit flatter.
I mean, there's two very clear responses to that. One is there's no way you can know, and these exams are standardized not just amongst the cohort but between exams. So the notion that there's an advantage or a disadvantage in sitting a particular test would be more indicative of a bad test. And ACER have been doing this long enough that that's not going to be a factor. And then the other thing that sort of comes from this is, in some respects, being from an older pool, you're always at an advantage, because if you just missed out in an older pool, with all of the higher scores that have now gone in being removed, you do have a better proportional chance slightly. So yeah, I wouldn't be viewing it through those lenses. And the other thing here is we're pretty confident this represents a smaller number of people. So you can only speculate, but if we were going to play around with numbers and say, all right, there's been a 25% decrease in the number of actual test sitters, then scores above, what's the top 10 percentiles, around about 70. So scores above 70, there's 25% less people that have that score. So no, you're not.
Yeah, no, fantastic. And yeah, I guess the curve does throw into the mix a lot of people that I guess are applying to universities such as University of Sydney, where it's solely GAMSAT. There is, quite a number of moving parts here that make, I guess, broad statement conclusions very, very difficult when it comes into, that I'm at a disadvantage because I did or did not sit March. That's definitely the case. We're seeing that, especially within the GEMSAS unis as well. Now there's a lot of changes that are occurring within the GPA realm. And so, there are a lot of different moving parts that are making this quite difficult to, just make very, I guess, hysterical responses to, for sure. Did you have any other final comments, Scott, on the curve itself?
No, just, the median, if you look at it longitudinally, it's relatively static. It does oscillate from exam to exam. We had a pretty good run in the last few exams where it was, approximately 58. It's jumped up a little bit here, but it's gone down in the past as well. So I wouldn't overanalyze this, and I would just more remember the guidelines are that you use your best score. and that's what you'll be ranked and selected based on.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I guess it's a perfect segue into our next chapter. Before we ask the question, should I change the GAMSAT? I guess the first thing is, can I actually change the GAMSAT when it comes to my applications?
Yeah, so there is a window of opportunity that's opened for changing which score you use if you have multiple scores, and also changing preferences. So going from memory, I believe the GEMSAS window is reopened until the 8th of July, I want to say, which is about a week away. So there is a 1 week window here where you can decide to do that. I'm not sure, is the University of Sydney allowing changing on their portal?
Look, I think they are, but I need to double check. There were a few different announcements that came out, so we definitely need to get on that as soon as possible, especially now. I mean, anything could change.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess the next thing is really, do I change? Like, what are the deciding factors that I need to put into play if I am able to change my GAMSAT and I do have another one that's eligible? What would weigh one more than the other? Because there are a few different ways to look at the actual GAMSAT. We've got, USyd that are looking at individual sections. We've got universities that are, looking at the average. We're looking at universities that are looking at the GAMSAT score. So, quite often these change what is competitive for a given university. How on earth do I guess, factor that in when I don't know which universities right now I'm quite, competitive for? Which one should I be gunning for?
Yeah, so there's some vernacular here that's worth building into one's syntax, which is the weighted and the unweighted scores. So the score that you receive from ASA is a weighted score. So section 3 is doubly weighted in that overall score. That can be really good for an unweighted score. It can also be really bad for an unweighted score. And that's where what you said, Christian, really matters, is that some of the universities will be looking at the scores in a weighted form, some in an unweighted form, and you should have both of your scores self-calculated, and you should use that as part of your preferencing, or deciding whether to change your scores. Because it's interesting, I got an email just before from someone, and their new GAMSAT score is higher, not by a lot. They already had a pretty good overall GAMSAT score. I think it was a 71. It's now a 75, but it's actually gone down when it's unweighted. So there were huge improvements in section 3 and some slight drops in section 1 and 2, which affects the unweighted balance. But from a weighted perspective, they improved significantly because section 3 has the additional weighting. So in that instance, if you're applying to somewhere like the University of Sydney that uses correct me if I'm wrong here, Christian, but an unweighted score.
The University of Sydney this time around will be doing the individual section
Yes,
weightings.
which is another way of saying probably that unweighted is favoured.
Yeah.
Then they would have used their old score, which was more evenly distributed around that sort of 71 mark, as opposed to this year, which had a 60s in sections sort of 1 and 2, and high 80s, 90s in section 3. Whereas in GEMSAS, for a lot of the unis there that take weighting, they would go with the more recent score, because on a weighted scale, it's top third percentile. It's a very good score.
So I guess what I would definitely do in this position is like map out my individual preferences and note them down, and right next to them write down what my GAMSAT score is according to how that university actually sees that GAMSAT, whether it be a weighted or an unweighted GAMSAT, and then list them all out and just see, like, for example, if I have 5 out of 6 GAMSAT scores in my uni preferences that are in the top whatever percentile because they're unweighted, then maybe it's in my best interest to choose an unweighted GAMSAT score. Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess that's probably the best way to go about it to really, you know, work out, because now it's a, how do I maximize, you know, how do I, it's not about choosing, you know, if we're in a position where it's very clear cut, then fantastic. But for a
yeah,
lot of people that aren't, this is where a bit of tactic has to come into it.
correct, correct. Um, and yeah, there's a couple of people as well that, you know, have had unfortunate situations where scores have gone backwards, and you know, for them it's an easy situation is that they'll retain their old score and probably keep the preferences as is. But if you're in one of the fortunate situations where there's been an improvement in the score, or it's gone up slightly and there's sort of a redistribution, then yeah, you need to get a bit tactical around the scores and the preferencing.
Yeah, sure, sure. No, fantastic. If you're happy to move on from GAMSAT specifically, then what we'll do is jump over this golden nugget of a question. What do I do about changing the preferences? I mean, for starters, Scott, just to clear the air, what exactly can we do if we decide to change our preferences? It's not a matter of adding or subtracting different universities. Is that right?
That is right. You can only change the order. You also can't change the nature of the place that you'd be willing to accept. So if you'd already submitted your application, and for argument's sake, you ticked only CSP, and now all of a sudden you're like, actually, I would accept bonded, and I would accept full fee. Unfortunately, you can't do that. That's already kind of locked away. The only thing you can do is change the order of the preferences in the list.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I guess coming back to that order, it probably sounds like if I am going to, you know, change the order of my application, I would be best to go back to that list that I created, you know, note out which scores are, you know, weighted, what's unweighted, what's higher, what's lower, and then maybe playing to those strengths. How does that sound?
Sounds very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, a lot of the students that I talked to around that time of getting the applications together, it was very much focused around sort of a plan A and a plan B. And you know, plan A is obviously if the score improves or reaches a certain threshold, then you have your dream sort of choice scoreboard and you roll with that. And then sort of plan B, if the score is within another certain range, the preferences shift to suit the likelihood of receiving offers in that range, and so on and so forth. So I remember in a webinar, I think yourself and Cal or yourself and Tom did around how the actual preferencing works from a mathematical perspective. The real goal there, if you were to surmise that into a very simple idea, is just to get yourself in one of those baskets that you would be getting a preference. So, and you do that by putting something that you have a high chance at as your first preference. That'll get you in into a basket, and then the hope is that you don't fall out of that basket and then have to be reallocated because there's no guarantee of reallocation.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, no, I mean, it sounds to me, you know, choosing, if we are going to choose between different GAMSATs, you know, and if we are going to choose between playing into our weighted or unweighted strength, it's a almost like an all or nothing preference. All the universities say, if I want to go for unweighted, preference them all maybe as high as possible, and preference the rest a little bit lower. It does, however, you know, become a little bit challenging if we are preferencing universities that are quite high first, but we're really not entirely there. We are sort of shooting ourselves in the foot there, especially if we have, say, portfolio universities where, as we know, they really do like to be up there in terms of the rank. And so, yeah, I mean, what do you have any final remarks on that?
Yeah, I mean, I had another email coming about that not so long ago before we jumped on here. Very, very competitive scores, and the preferences that were originally put in were what I would consider as being Plan B preferences. You know, my advice was, well, now you can switch to Plan A. Like your score is in the 70s. It's very competitive. You should now roll the dice with the places that you really want to go. And the other thing to remember about the portfolio universities is, the portfolio and the personal statement are really the things that they care a lot about. So um, you can have a very, very good GAMSAT score and not necessarily get the best return on investment for your application if you're, in inverted commas, not a portfolio uni person. So yeah, if you've got a really good score now, or you've got some improvement, then yeah, reorganize. And it doesn't have to be a total reversal either. It could just be, what, I think I'm a shot now at University X that it was on my aspirational list. The only thing I'm going to change is I'm going to move it to number one and bump everything else down one. So it doesn't. I think that's another thing that students sometimes overthink, is they think it has to be drastic. Like we're totally shifting the whole order and changing everything. We're not starting from scratch. You would have arrived at the previous preferencing that you came up with for sound reasons, and now we're going to adjust slightly. So yeah, you're not starting from point zero.
Yeah, awesome. It really does sound like a question in the GAMSAT, and we're going over our answers, and are we going over the answers and bringing in something that probably isn't the most, I guess, sound in mind, as you were saying. And yeah, it definitely something to reflect on and not, act too hastily over. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. No, awesome. Look, are you happy to move on to a little bit of Q&A, Scott? If there's any other comments that you would like to make before that?
No, more than happy to. Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add around preferences, given that you know you've been through this not so long ago?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, um, at really at the end of the day, we have these the universities and the places that they're locked. We can't add, we can't remove in that case. And so do also keep in mind, or I would be keeping in mind, where I actually want to go, because that's a really big factor. Your own personal choice is something that's really big. We can spend so long agonizing on how to change these preferences in this scenario in light of the results. But at the end of the day, like we really, as we said before, there's so much going on that it may not actually be in our best interest to change remarkably when it comes to the preferences. So, the one constant that we do have is where we actually want to go in regards to a university, and that's definitely something to not neglect as we are reflecting on the scores that we actually have going. No, I guess in terms of the graph itself, or the curve, keep in mind that when ASA generate those that distribution, that curve, and they give it based off their GAMSAT result, that is that weighted score where they've weighted it 3 times. Now, if you then take those scores and work out the average score for those universities that do work out averages, in essence, what you've done is change the distribution. So we can't go straight back into that curve and try to see exactly where we are in terms of that percentile. It's apples and oranges as soon as you start changing that curve. It's the exact same reason why, for example, you can't take your section 3 mark and look at that curve and say, oh, look, based off this average curve, I'm in the top blah, blah, blah percent on my section 3 mark. That curve is specific for if you're weighting it, 3 times. And so as soon as you do change it and start, equally weighting those sections, do keep in mind that we can't really look at that curve anymore. Right at that point, it's probably a good point to introduce a bit of wider reading. We have quite a number of articles on our website that cover this sort of thing, to try to ensure that we are still comprehending something that's still competitive or not competitive, now that we have worked out a clean average unweighted score. So yeah, I mean, do keep in mind that we are comparing apples and oranges in that case.
Yeah, good advice. Very good advice.
Awesome. No, fantastic. I mean, we've got no Q and A's at the moment that have come through on Facebook, but I'm happy to continue on the conversation and wait for those to trickle in. Were there any emails or phone calls, Scott, that you know think really stood out that you know a lot of our viewers that have logged in can learn from?
Um, I think I think one thing that's been a bit of a common thread is what this means if things didn't go to plan in the context of the longer view and the journey towards the end goal. Um, it was a really weird period, the what became the May period, and you know we're still in the times of COVID, and we're still coming out of that, hopefully, depending on what part of the world you're located in. So if things didn't go to plan, if things didn't work the way you wanted, there were so many variables that weren't traditional variables in there for you to have had to have managed that I wouldn't take an end of the world approach to that. I would look at things that were going well and the things that you took out of your preparation process, and yeah, aim to co-opt them into September, or aim to co-opt them into the next March sitting. Um, GAMSAT isn't something where you just flick a switch on and off, or on or off, and equally that you forget everything. I think that's actually a really interesting thing in and of itself, where people say, "Well, studied for the GAMSAT, I've had a month off, now I've forgotten everything." The really tough reflection there is, well, then did you really know it? Because that would suggest that you were more hoping that sheer volume of retention was going to translate, as opposed to aptitude, skill, and genuine ability that had been acquired over a period of time. Um, Hopefully, you're just being harsh on yourself, and it's really easy in a time like now to have a lot of negative self-talk and be overly critical. When in actual fact, you know, it could have been a bad day. It could have been the actual nature of the proctoring situation, a range of different things, and there's a lot that you've done that will mean that when you're prepping the next time, you're not starting from point zero, you're starting from point six in a 10 point process, and it's much easier to reach point nine, point 10 from point six. So definitely don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But also, if you're of that mindset for the time being, maybe take a bit of time to just you know, unwind and whatnot. If you're not, especially if you're not doubling down for September, um, and and come up with a more formulated process for March, so that you can make the most of your previous efforts, and put them to good use.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Two things that really stood out to me that you said, Scott, was, I mean, pardon me, it's not unlike, you know, when as we're you know using so many months of study to build up skills. At the end of the day, we all know we're not building up raw knowledge, and you know that's the key thing there. We're building up, we're changing our actual thinking styles as we are going through this exam. And so to think that we can just lose those, you know, cognitive abilities, you know, just because we have to wait until, say, the September sitting, or we can't sit it until next year, really is, I guess, a fallacy. There are so many skill sets that we have learned over the course of the, you know, last however many months that definitely can be translated, you know, moving into the next GAMSAT if we need to sit it. And then I guess, yes, secondly, it really wasn't ideal conditions, as you said. There was, you know, we, like the webinar we held, you know, not too long ago, of all the messed up ProctorU, you know, correspondence, and, you know, equally from ASA. And these were not all conducive to I guess, performance that would have been up to standard for absolutely everybody. And so, you know, it reverts back to the cliche of, you know, you're not the number, or, you know, things like that. There really are a lot of, you know, untapped or unrepresented abilities that a lot of people would be facing at this given time. No, yeah, awesome. I guess there's a question that's popped up on the stream saying which unis use unweighted and weighted marks. Look, for something like that, where we definitely have articles on the Fraser's GAMSAT page, but we will start, bringing up a few communications, pushing that, so it is all clear and we don't all have to troll through pages of addendums added to GAMSAT guides and so forth. Scott, what about this one here? Advice on stomaching the courage to even check the result.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I would say a solid 20% of my SMSs have been, hey, the results are out. I can't open mine. How's everyone else going? Um, really, really common. Really common. You're not odd or weird or different. It's a personality trait where those opening those results. I had one student a while ago open their GAMSAT results like just before interviews came out. Just yeah.
Not a lot of preparation there.
No. Did the interview process of putting the applications in, but like worked off of I don't know what my score is, so I'm just going to put it in. Yeah, for some people, it's such a tough thing. I don't know. Like I think if you're in that sort of a position, maybe wait for the right time. Maybe not while you're driving, that type of thing. Maybe once you're home and you're settled, because it could be sheer elation, in which case you're thrilled. It could be ambivalence. It could be sadness and all the things that go along with that. So yeah, if you're in that group, you don't have to open it right now, but don't delay it. The amount of time you delay doesn't actually correlate to the numbers changing in that email.
No, yeah, for sure. And it sort of does, I guess, it prolongs the state of limbo, and the state of, I guess, uncertainty and inability rather to start planning out the ways forward. Whenever I guess usually when we get like, bad news or, news that is quite, I guess, exhausting to take on, there's always, that dip of, I guess, if it is not what we expected, the anger, and then, coming down to, I guess, almost a state of breakdown, but then the acceptance moving on. And by not opening it up, you really are delaying the stage in which you can accept and start, moving on with your life and working out exactly what's next. And ideally, that's what we want to get to, whether that be, accepting that the score may not be high as we hoped, but we're still going to apply, or, continue with our application. Or if it really wasn't high enough, then, what, let's move on. Yeah. Next year hasn't, potentially worked out how I hoped, but there's so much that can be done in a year, so much that can be learned. And, in the scheme of it, in years to come, it really, like, I know it's such a hindsight sort of, mentality, but there is so much that can happen in the meantime that still ensures that you're not, stagnating as a human being and eventually as a doctor. So yeah, I mean, the quicker you do open it, the quicker you can move on. But, Scott, as you were saying, if you're not in that mindset, then respect yourself, wait until you are in the position to really, move on with that. Scott, this question here, if I sat it, last year or last season, and I got a 65, does this mean I'm less competitive now? Is that 65 less competitive because of, the median shift? We've spoken it a little bit before, but there have been a number of others that joined in a little bit later. What do you have on that?
So the answer would be no. The percentiles tell you something about your own cohort. They don't tell you necessarily about other cohorts. And ultimately, when you go to apply, the percentile isn't used in part of the calculation. It's just the GAMSAT score. The other thing that we spoke about earlier was that we know that there were less people sitting this particular exam for two main reasons. One was elected deferral, so where people chose to push the exam back because they felt disrupted, or maybe they weren't feeling confident, range of different things. And the other one, and there was quite a few people in this boat, was that they just weren't checking their emails. And there was a time lapse where if you didn't re-register for May, you got pushed to September anyhow. So if we take an estimate of about 25% of people being shifted, it means there's less people in this May cohort compared to what it normally would be. That does help explain some of the shifting and changing in numbers. And it does mean that on the whole, there's less people with approximate scores. And that applies to all different parts of the score curve. So that means there's 25% less people with 65s. There's 25% less people with 68s, 25% less people with 60s. Like it's not something that only affects certain parts of the curve. So in that sense, there's no disadvantage. And the number of people with a score will be approximately similar, if not slightly less, in which case you could probably make a case that you're at an advantage.
Yeah, for sure. Another question just surrounding GPAs. Keep in mind with the COVID changes to GPAs this year, for universities that are, for example, not giving you a choice to, they will be scrapping this year's GPA. There's been a lot of concern as to also like how that impacts their, I guess, standing in regards to GPAs, and how that impacts, consequently the GAMSAT and, the interview score that they actually need. One thing to always remember is that GPAs are relevant for the vast majority of universities for 10 years in total. And so the number of people that happen to be in their third year this year that have this year's GPA, not counted in the scheme of everybody that's actually applying is quite minimal. And so when we're looking at the distribution of GPA scores, this probably won't be enough to change what would be a competitive GPA. It's not like GAMSAT where it's every 2 years and, the scores need to change. This is, 10 years worth of GPA. And not to mention, on the whole, usually third year GPAs don't often impact the overall GPA, compared as much as we think, compared to when we just consider our first 2 years. And that goes alongside the idea that those that have, whatever their GPA is after their second year of their undergrad, it doesn't shift remarkably different by the end of their third year. And so not having this third year won't really impact what we consider to be a competitive GPA, and in essence affecting the GAMSAT thereafter.
Yeah, that's really good analysis of the situation. So yeah, it's a little bit of reporter bias, but at the same time, if you're in that boat, I can totally see how you would be feeling like it's a very raw deal, especially if you're one of the people who could use a very solid third year to, maybe you're not going to go from a 6 to a 7 because that's not really possible, but you go from a 6 to a 6.6, and because you are a good GAMSAT student, that is what, it kind of makes the difference, even though it's not huge. So look, for people in that boat, you just have to deal with it as best you can. I think the universities are going to try to do their best to accommodate where they can. And the other thing is, like, there's a pretty solid Facebook group. I think it's opt-in, opt-out. I could alt tab across to this, and I might when we're answering another question.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been collating and getting together a lot of the different information as it evolves and as it changes. And the other thing there is there's a lot of very good advice around potentially what you should do, because second semester is due to start soon. And it could simply be that you defer your second semester if you're someone that's going to be really affected by this. But those are the places where their focus is that information that it'd be best to go and get the answers. We can give some opinions. I think Christian's sort of broader analysis there is actually a really interesting one. So it shouldn't be a drastic effect, but I think another interesting thing to do, maybe as part of the future thinking, is when you apply, hopefully you get an interview, maybe you don't. And when you follow up with the university, ask them what aspect of your application resulted in not getting the interview or not getting the place if you did get an interview. And if they do point to your GPA, then, there's cause to go to the university or go to another pathway that you can deal with that. I know I said a while ago to students that they should be strongly canvassing the idea of getting a deferral for the whole year if it's really going to be that bothersome to you. And it sounds like a very Karen thing to do, is to speak to the manager and say, well, I want a full refund, I want this. But you would do it with phrases, you would do it with anyone else. Why do unis get special treatment of not being accountable for decisions that impact people's future? And you are a paying customer, you're just paying later. That's what HEX is. So if there isn't really an opportunity there for you to come out of this in a way that is going to show you in the light that you should be, then take the rest of the year off and actually ask to just redo this year next year, and have it struck off your academic record. That's from an ACCC standpoint, that's actually a really fair outcome. The university still gets their paying customer. You're still going to pay, but these effects that are affecting your service quality right now, you're not having to deal with that in a long-term sense.
Yeah,
sure.
sure.
That's what I would do to go full Karen mode on them.
And I mean, like we've had so many conversations with students that have been where's Arsha? But conversations with students where I mean, look, third year for a number of universities is weighted triple. I was in when I was doing my undergrad at Melbourne. I was in second year when they announced that third year wouldn't be weighted triple anymore, and it would be only weighted double. And that was the biggest hysteria of the cohort. There were so many students at that time that had saved their first year breadth subjects in some sort of sports coaching elective, or exactly right. Saving it for the third year, hoping to smash it out, having it weighted triple, and then it was only weighted double. And so we can definitely empathize when now they're saying, hey, we're not even going to look at your third year. And it's like, well, where do I stand? The anger is definitely I guess founded, but geez, the changes as they're not done. There's still a lot going on. Obviously now we're turning to September GAMSAT. We're trying to work out exactly what's happening with September GAMSAT. We have a really awesome article coming out shortly that'll be published onto the website, that if you're interested in September, there's a lot of new information that's coming to light about that, which is this whole own kettle of fish. And we have a lot to learn from the March GAMSAT, both in terms of how it was actually delivered, and also the content within the GAMSAT, because as we know, there was a lot different about the content in this GAMSAT than initially anticipated. There were the questions being almost halved, the number of papers changing, the content. There was quite a lot of, I guess, raw classical science content, which at the end of the day can be interpreted as a little bit of sloppy action on ACE's behalf, trying to churn out a couple extra GAMSATs than they actually anticipated in the first place.
Yeah, maybe scraping the bottom of the barrel. Yeah.
So
Um,
yeah, there's a lot to learn from that, and a lot to take on board if we are looking to September. Um, I'll have one quick sneaky look at the Q&A, Scott, but I think we're at a time where we can possibly wrap it up.
Indeed.
You're happy with that? Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no others have come through. Any other final remarks you have for the viewers?
No, just good luck with the rest of the opening of the envelopes. I'm sure a lot of you might even see this recording once it goes up, and you're not even there yet, but hopefully it's gone well. And yeah, hopefully you're on to the next phase of getting ready, and it's all systems go. And if not, it hasn't been for naught, and you can still utilize what you've done in the previous attempts to push on forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Scott. I know a lot of people have appreciated this. A bit of, I guess, answers to the confusion going on. No, thank you. I do appreciate it.
No stress, Christian. Thank you too.
Awesome, awesome. Have a good day, guys. We'll be in touch with more content.
Cheers, everyone.
See you.